everyone, and welcome to this very special day with some wonderful announcements and this great book launch. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered on Treaty 1 territory and that Manitoba is located on the treaty territories and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Dakota, Anishinaabe, Oyate, Denisovan, and Nehiyawak nations. That's not what I usually use. We acknowledge that Manitoba is located also on the homeland of the Red River Métis. Sorry, Marlon.
Sorry.
And we acknowledge that northern Manitoba includes lands that were and are ancestral lands of the Inuit. We respect the spirit and intent of treaties and treaty making and remain committed to working in partnership with First Nations, Inuit, Métis people in the spirit of truth, reconciliation, and collaboration. I'd like to acknowledge some very special guests with us tonight. Tracy Schmidt, Minister of Education, Minister Mike Moreau's Innovation and New Technology, and MLA Carla Compton. And you'll be hearing from Minister Schmidt very shortly. Today is a day that we have been longing for 50 years. 50 years ago, we asked the government for a mandated curriculum on Holocaust education. And as of this afternoon, we have one. We at the Jewish Heritage Center are so proud to have partnered with the province on the development of what is a robust and enhanced curriculum on Holocaust education. We have employed the highest standards of international best practices, and we're proud to have included Canadian resources, including the book you're going to hear about today, and Manitoba authors. And we firmly believe that this curriculum will provide students with a deeper understanding of one of history's darkest chapters, and it will equip them to recognize and respond to hatred, discrimination, and threats to democracy. I'm a child of 2 Holocaust survivors, and here I am getting verklempt. Today, when we made this announcement, I felt my parents' spirits, who unfortunately are long gone, and I thought of all of the family that I never got to meet because of the hate that resulted in the Holocaust. I am so grateful to the province to have listened to us in developing this curriculum, to make it about not just the tragic history of 1933 to 1945, but about who we were before that and who we are now and what we brought to Manitoba and to Canada. And it was really a pleasure doing this. It all started off with the late Minister Jarniewski, and Minister Schmidt took this on, and I'm just so thrilled. I want to thank Kelly Hiebert, who did a magnificent job in drafting that curriculum, and to all of the people that listened and understood why this is so important. I believe that we, without a doubt, have the best curriculum on Holocaust education in this country. And therefore, it is with tremendous pleasure that I introduce a very special guest, Tracy Schmidt, Manitoba's Minister of Education and Early Childhood Learning, who carried on the vision of the late Nello Altomare and ensured that this excellent curriculum would see the light, and who worked with us to make sure that we got it right. Tracy Schmidt was elected as the MLA for Rossmere in October of 2023. She's a lawyer with a background in labor and employment law, and she was sworn in as Minister of Education and Early Childhood Learning in January of 2025, after previously having served as a Minister of Environment and Climate Change. She's been appointed to many boards and committees as well, including the Treasury Board, Healthy Child Committee of the Cabinet, Community Economic Development Committee, the Legislative Review Committee, the Poverty Reduction Committee of Cabinet, and the Public Sector Compensation Committee. So I invite Minister Schmidt to come up and just say a few words on this very, very special day.
Thank you very much, Belle, for that very warm introduction, and good evening to everyone. It's such really a humble pleasure to be here on behalf of the Government of Manitoba, on behalf of Premier Wab Kinew, on behalf of all of my colleagues at the legislature, and including some of my colleagues that are no longer in the legislature. I really want to thank you. I was going to say some words about the late Minister Altamari, and really I want to make sure that I also have so much gratitude to the late Minister Nello Altamari for him initiating this work. So yeah, thank you so much. So it's, again, very humbling to be here on the 87th anniversary of one of the most tragic and devastating events in Jewish history. Kristallnacht was not only devastating in its immediate impact on human lives, but also signaled the beginning of a much darker chapter, the Holocaust. We reflect on Kristallnacht, we reflect on the Holocaust and the terrible suffering endured, and that reflection is a powerful reminder of the consequences of unchecked hatred and indifference. Here in Manitoba, we cannot be divided by hatred. That's why our government is committed to ensuring that young Manitobans learn the lessons of history so that the Holocaust will never be forgotten and is never repeated. And for our government, this is really not just words, this is something we're putting into action in many different ways. I don't know if anyone was able to read the Free Press this weekend, but Maggie McIntosh wrote a great story about one of our other government initiatives that's going on right now. For the first time ever in history, the government of Manitoba has fully funded 30 students from across our province, from every corner of our province they are in Europe right now on a World War II educational tour. Part of which was to visit the Anne Frank House. And if you didn't read the newspaper, I took a screenshot, just a quick quote of one of the students that was interviewed, a 16-year-old. And what she said was, "Seeing the place with my own eyes gave me a whole new perspective on the events connected to Anne's life." And that was, again, a student visiting the Anne Frank House. So I've been reflecting, obviously tomorrow is Remembrance Day. I've been reflecting on the call to action of sort of lest we forget. And lest we forget is not just a reminder, right? It's a warning, lest we forget. So I think I have been reflecting a lot about, we're at a time in history where that living memory of the events of the Holocaust, we have very few folks with a living memory of that event. And so it's so important now more than ever, I think, to make sure that we are equipping children with those lessons so that we don't repeat those shameful harms of the past. So today we are here alongside of the release of this great book, A Storm Unleashed. We are here to announce the release of Manitoba's new mandatory Holocaust curriculum and the education guide for educators. So together, the education guide, the teacher's guide, and the curricular learning outcomes for grades 6, 9, and 11 social studies will support educators in guiding learners through the critical examination of the causes and consequences of the Holocaust with a focus on the lessons that they may apply to making today's world a better place. So thank you to Belle, thank you to Kelly, thank you to the Jewish Heritage Centre of Western Canada for supporting and really leading the development of this resource. We are very confident at the province that this will help educators and students deepen their understanding of the Holocaust, and students right across Manitoba will benefit and will create a more diverse, inclusive province for all of us, and is really going to prevent the spread of intolerance, racism, and dehumanization. It's also our hope that these efforts will broaden learners' understanding that the legacy of the Holocaust is not only one of tragedy, but also one of remarkable strength, resilience, and survival, reflected in the valuable contributions of Jewish people here in Manitoba and across Canada and the world today. So congratulations to Carol, not just on the launch of your new book, congratulations, but also thank you for the role that you play in educating all of us and certainly young people. Thank you. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you to my colleagues for joining us, and thank you all of you so very much. And I'm very excited to participate in the rest of the evening. Thank you very much.
So now I get to introduce my friend Carol. This is Carol's 50th book.
Wow.
Amazing. Carol Matus is an internationally acclaimed author of 50 novels for children and young adults. Her best-selling work has been translated into over a dozen languages, including Spanish, Japanese, Korean, French, and Danish. Carol writes contemporary and historical fiction, as well as science fiction and fantasy. She first began writing historical fiction when her Danish husband told her stories about his parents' experiences fighting the Nazis in World War II. She has often written about Jewish themes and is well known for her books concerning the Holocaust, writing Daniel's story at the request of the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., which has sold over 1 million copies in the United States and Canada. And I remember there was an exhibit on Daniel's story as well at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Her books have been recognized with over 100 awards and honors. The awards include numerous Sidney Taylor Awards, the Jeffrey Bilson Award, the inaugural Silver Birch Award, 2 Canadian Jewish Book Awards, and 2 nominations for the Governor General's Award. Her novel, Tucson Joe, was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award. She has adapted some of her books into plays and has had productions in Montreal, Toronto, and Winnipeg. And I want to reiterate that Carol's book is noted in today's curriculum as recommended for readers in grade 6. It is beyond, like, the best book that I have read for middle school readers. And I also think that as an adult, we all had enjoyed it so much reading it and working with you on it. So Carol would like to read an excerpt from her book, and then Kelly and I will be asking her some questions. So over to you, Carol.
Thank you so much, Belle. Okay. So, thank you all very much for being here. It's a very special day today. And I'd like to actually begin with a special thank you to Minister Schmidt. Thank you for enacting the Holocaust education in the schools. It cannot be overstated what an important step this is. And I need to say how privileged I am to be here with 2 of the people so engaged in that process, Belle Jarniewski and Kelly Hiebert. And also a huge shout out to you, Belle, for being the go-to person for my book, for accuracy, and for your tremendous support of the book. Yeah, she was the one I went to with, would this happen, could this happen? She read it when it was over to fact check and make sure it was all correct, and I just can't thank you enough. And of course, I'd like to, in terms of the book launch, welcome all of you. Mike, who we became friends when he pitched a tent outside my house when it was election time, until I just told him I'd vote for him. Okay, maybe he didn't, maybe he did. And to Carla Compton, and of course the minister. And I know you're all very busy, so we really appreciate you being here. And to my family, and to my friends, and to all of you, and to the Jewish Historical Center and the Jewish Federation and Scholastic Canada for hosting this event. Thank you so much. And I'm really, really honored and touched that my novel has been chosen as a resource for grade 6. It's kind of beyond anything that I could have imagined, and it's a big wow for me, and I just really appreciate it. So, since we're here to launch the book, I'll just tell you a little bit about how I came to write this book. It's almost like a full circle book for me, because the very first book I wrote was a book called Lisa, and it was set in Denmark. And as Belle mentioned, it came about through my husband. We were living in Montreal, and somebody gave him a book called Rescue in Denmark. And of course, he knew this story, but he passed it on to me, and he said, I don't know if you know any of this, and you want to read the book? And I read the book, and okay, so here I grew up in Winnipeg. My parents went to Share Zedek. I had a bat mitzvah. I learned about the Holocaust when I was in around grade 4. Very traumatized when I learned about it. Kind of changed my life. I was like, okay, human beings are not the best things in the whole world. And it kind of skewed my view for a very long time about the world. And then Paya gave me this book about rescue in Denmark. And this was a story, although I was Jewish and thought I knew a lot about the Holocaust, I had never heard. And it was the story of the rescue of the Danish Jews. But more than that, it was the story of how the Danish people did not give in to that hatred. The first things that the Nazis did when they arrived there was they started to have rallies. And of course in Germany, we've all seen the pictures of the rallies, and I'm not sure how many people used to go, hundreds of thousands? 200,000. I've got my experts right here, have my back. Believe it or not, I was a terrible history student. And no one came to these rallies in Denmark. Like, no one showed up. They would have these huge rallies and nobody came. And you've probably all heard this apocryphal story of the king saying nobody will wear a yellow star. But in fact, in his diaries, he did write that no citizen would be separate from any other citizen. So this was a big revelation to me, and I was just like, well, wait a minute. Why didn't everyone do that? What happened in Poland, for instance, where we know 3 million were murdered, right? And it gave me hope, but it was also very disturbing, right? It gave me hope that it didn't have to happen. That's the main thing. And I think that's what set me on the course to write all these Holocaust books. Most of my books have had some Jewish content, but, you know, and not all of them are Holocaust books, but I think it's something like, I don't know, I'm not sure, 12, 13 that are actual Holocaust books. And it set me on the course to do that because I was like, there has to be a knowledge. The kids have to learn that it didn't have to happen and that it should never happen again. So I almost look at it as an immunization. You know, if they start thinking when they're young and they realize that hatred is not the way and that it is a killer, literally a killer, then maybe as they grow up, they can stand up to dictatorships and autocracies and all the things that we know are very, very bad. So I wrote just a little sort of almost little manifesto that it's very short that I'll just read to you before I read you a section which leads right into the section, which sort of just goes on to say what I was trying to say, the first part, which is trying to help students understand civic responsibility and moral choices, which will help them become better citizens and strengthen our democracy, because that's what we, I think, all want. And then another reason, of course, to write this book is to talk about anti-Semitism and how it works, because I don't think a lot of people really understand that. And in this book, I really tried to center on that a lot, and by sort of setting it before the Holocaust happened, in sort of 33 to 35 in Germany, then you can get a better sense of actually how it works. And there's a lot of description about how it works in the book. And finally, something that the book is about is this army of dogs that Hitler created, that not too many people know about this story. I discovered while actually researching an earlier book, Struggle for Hope, that they had trained an army of over 200,000 dogs. And if you think about any film that you've seen from that era, there's always the dogs there, right? Snarling and barking and, controlling people, right? And they were used for intimidation and for roundups, and they really could not have done that in the mass way that they did it without the dogs, because they just didn't have enough people. So it turned out to be very important. And of course, Mia having a dog as a best friend really upped the stakes for her. And that's sort of just a little intro about it. But since I've been talking to you about the dog army, I'm going to go right into a section. I'm just going to fix this a little bit here. Okay. I'm going to go right into a section because I think you'll get a better idea from my reading than my explaining it to you about why the dogs and what kind of moral choices that it was allowed me to investigate in this book. So this is a section where, there we go, wrong one. This is a section where Mia, her dad is a veterinarian, and in fact he's Jewish. Her mother died when just after Mia was born, and she was Christian. And so it's just the two of them, Mia and her dad. And he has been allowed to continue as a veterinarian. This is 1935, because he fought in the war. And if you had an Iron Cross, then you were allowed to, maybe to keep your job for a little while longer if you were Jewish. Anyway, she discovers that he's actually training dogs for the Germans, which of course he kept secret from her. And after but she still thinks this is just police work, right? And that he's been, brought in to do the usual training that he's used to doing. But she starts to question what is going on, and I'll start here. You told me once that bad people create bad dogs, I muse. You said there's no such thing as a puppy who's born bad. Yes, Father says, I stand by that. But I ask, can we train a dog to be bad? For instance, do you think we could train Max to be a bad dog? Not like in police work, but could we make him so vicious he would always attack without a command? Because I heard you say you might be ordered to train those dogs to bring down without a command. Well, if they're trained to attack at all times, wouldn't that turn them into vicious dogs? It might be possible, he says, though it's unlikely for Max because of his nature. If it's possible, I say, does that mean he's not really a good dog? Before he can answer, another thought occurs to me. Could you train me to be bad? To harm people? Or to tell lies? Or anything? That might be possible as well, he agrees. However, it might not, because you know the difference between right and wrong, and you want to do what is right. What if you told me lying or stealing was right? What if I had a good reason to lie? If I had a good reason to lie or steal, then wouldn't I believe you? You're my father, my trainer. I'm becoming upset. Is it possible I could be convinced to do anything? Anything at all? I will tell you a way to know if you're being told to do something you should not. What? I stand up now and stare at him. A very learned rabbi from long ago once wrote, that which is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. I consider this. So, if I do not think I would like to be treated a certain way, I shouldn't treat another that way. Yes, exactly, says Father. But a dog cannot understand that, I reply. No, but I doubt some dogs could ever be vicious. In a way, some of them will have something in them that will help them decide not to obey a command that is wrong. I cannot help but think about the girl dressed for the Young Girls' League, the one who tried to take Max from me. Did she choose to believe in the Nazis and their hatred of Jews? Did she choose to be a bully and take what she wanted? Or has she been trained by her parents, by her classmates, by the newspapers and all the horrible things they print, by teachers like Frau Koch, who every day drums into our heads how noble Nazis are and how vicious Jews are? who are we really? Are we no better than dogs? Dogs aren't born bad, but they can be trained to be bad. If people are the same and we all have the potential for good and bad in us, including me, then what? I assume I can think for myself, but can I? Can anyone? I consider my classmates. Every day we're forced to repeat how great Hitler is, how great the Nazis are, how terrible the Jews are. When do people stop repeating this and start believing it? Okay. Should I stop there or should I do one more section? Yeah. I have one more section. If we have time, I'll read it later.
Okay. It's nice, it's an honor and a privilege to be up here with these two lovely ladies who I feel like I'm not worthy of being in the same chairs as them. No, honestly, they humble me all the time, and I just wanted to thank them for inviting me to be a part of this. So thank you. So what inspired you to explore the early years of Nazi rule rather than the more commonly depicted wartime period? You don't see that too often in books like this.
Right. So I mean, I think as I just mentioned, I think the main thing was to be able to talk about the buildup and to talk about anti-Semitism. And actually, if we have time, I would like to read a little bit of another section later, which explains and shows what happens in schools and what happened in school in Germany in that time. And it's really, really shocking. Like I was really fortunate that Belle, my husband, although he's retired, he still had access to the University of Winnipeg library. He taught at U of W. And I found most of my research actually online from scholarly papers. And, you know, I was able to find out like exactly what the curriculum was, exactly what people said. So when you read the stuff in the book and you hear those conversations that went on in school, you will see that, I mean, that is almost word for word what was happening there then. So I just thought, and it also gave me a chance for her, because Mia has been brought up, so maybe I'll just flip back a little bit. When I write a book, I think of what I want to write about first. Now, a lot of authors do it the other way around. They think that they have a character and they follow the character, and the character creates the story. I do it quite differently. I decide on a plot and a theme, and my characters serve my plot and theme. Now, that doesn't mean they're cardboard characters, hopefully, they're not. But they're there for a reason. So Mia, I wanted her to be a real nerd, what we would call a nerd these days. So, you know, or maybe like I was growing up a bookworm, and she's a bird watcher, and she just loves to learn, and she wants to be a vet, and that helps the plot because, you know, because she's learning all the time and she's inquisitive, but also because I then have her father as a very non-religious, you know, sort of Jew, and their household isn't really Jewish at all. She's the one that ends up asking the questions. And to me, as a writer for young people, you'll find that in all my books. There's usually somebody on one side yelling, this is the way it is, and somebody on the other side yelling, no, this is the way it is. And then you have my main character going, what is the way? And that's the character I want the young people to relate to, because that's the character that has to think for themselves and has to figure it out and has to ask the questions during the course of the book. And then hopefully they get that idea that, yeah, that's a good thing. I don't need to know everything. I don't have to be on one side or the other side. I can be the one who questions and who tries to figure it out.
So I don't know if I went off, but.
No, that was good. And I just wanted to add a comment
Yeah.
to what you just said there. I think that's what makes it so relatable for students and for myself. I think I have 2 boys, 12 and 10, and my 12-year-old has read the book and he loved it. And same thing, I think they feel pressured by society to make choices that society feels is right, but they don't necessarily agree with that. And I feel like this, the character Mia really portrays that to the students as to it's okay to challenge authority, it's okay to be inquisitive, we should be critical thinkers, right? Not just go with what the mainstream says. So that's one thing that really stood out to me as well, and I really appreciated that.
And really appropriate, especially tonight, Kristallnacht, seeing that those early years just before Kristallnacht and what was building up. And it also, what you were saying, it made me think of that song from South Pacific, You Have to Be Carefully Taught. And these children were definitely carefully taught.
It shuts off for some reason.
And sadly, we still see that today. We know that there are a lot of children in this world that are being taught to hate, and that includes anti-Semitism as well. So I wanted to ask you, following up on that another thing that's different about this book, is it not working? Is that you wrote Mia's character as initially, that her late mother was not Jewish, she was Christian, and I wondered why you made that choice, but also, what were you trying to tell your readers about Germany at that time? Because this was unusual in a lot of other countries for a Jew to be married to a Christian.
Okay, a couple questions there. I think I'll take the second one first, then you can remind me of the first one. No, I've forgotten that. The second one was that, as with Daniel's story, their family goes back, like they say, 1,000 years in Germany, which actually was a thing. So it's almost hard for us Canadians, to imagine unless you're Indigenous, right? And then you're like, yeah, But for those of us, most of us are sort of recent immigrants in a way. And so I think that I really wanted them to get that sense of she felt like she belonged there. Like they felt like they belonged in Germany. Their family, and when the first, I start off with the first boycott, right? That happened in 1933. The boycott of Jewish businesses and even veterinary practices, everything. There was an entire Jewish boycott in 33. And then, of course, in 35, there was the pogrom. It's also in the book. And I think it was, and after the first boycott, the Jewish leaders sent out messages to the Jews, don't leave. Like, we have to stick together. We have to stay here. This is our place. And, looking back, we're like, what were they thinking, right? And I was just reading Herzl and how in 36 he was begging Jews in Poland to leave, just begging them. He was just like over and over screaming, leave, leave, leave. But they felt they belonged. So I thought that was really important to get that sense of, the sense of place, and that the Jewish community wanted them to stay there.
They really
And the bewilderment.
They felt more German than Jewish.
They did. They absolutely did. Yeah.
And they fought in World War I.
Exactly. And intermarriage was extremely common, and as I said, in this family it was very common. They were Jewish, but only in like they didn't practice. I think I have it that they celebrated Hanukkah. That was it, right? Because that was a fun holiday. But and if they were invited somewhere, they would go, But other than that, yeah. But they soon discovered how Jewish they were. And what was the second part?
You answered.
Okay, I answered both.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
That microphone is dead, so I'll have to use my teaching tools. There, that's a weird microphone. Okay. So your book introduces a little known history of Hitler's dog army, which you spoke about in your introduction. What drew you to this topic, and how does it reflect the regime's use of animals as a tool of control and terror? And a lot of the time we focus on the bureaucratic apparatus, especially in grade 9, grade 11, grade 12. But I think it's quite an interesting perspective to look at the animals as a use of terror and fear and control.
I mean, I think the animals is, so first of all, for those of you that know me, you know that I'm a dog lover. And I've had dogs my whole life. Like when we were kids, we had dogs, and you know, when Pay and I got married, we've almost always had a dog. And in fact, one of them saved my grandson's life. That's another story. I can tell you about that one day. When I discovered this story of the dog army, I immediately sort of felt like, oh, you know, yikes, right? Like just the terrible side of what they were able to do with the dogs, and knowing how much love a dog can give you, you know, I immediately saw that could make a really good, you know, develop a really good debate in the book and be very emotional. And I wanted something that was really emotional, you know, for kids. Because, you know, even if kids don't have pets, they can relate to the animals, you know, and so it's something that I felt would be really relatable. I had to go through a sort of thing of, which I won't tell you how it ends up. Does the dog live? Does the dog die? I mean, I think I cried after Old Yeller, which, you know, for 2 weeks. So, you know, but yeah, I think it's just a really, it's an important story actually in terms of what happened, but it's also a very good vehicle in terms of grabbing onto those emotions so that kids can really feel it, and it's not just numbers and, you know, stuff that is sort of not emotional, because, and that's, I think, something that fiction can do that is a wonderful thing, because it can make kids empathize with one character, maybe one dog, and that makes it more believable and important to them, because empathy is something that, of course, we want all our children and our young people to cultivate. Belle?
And you have this this girl who, you know, Mia's afraid that she's going to take her dog away, and you haven't, it comes a little later on in history, and certainly by the time of Kristallnacht, that Jews were not allowed to even own dogs, and that they had to turn their dog, they couldn't even give their dog away to a non-Jew. They had to have their dogs euthanized, and that on Kristallnacht, they also killed dogs in belonging to Jews, in addition to Jews themselves. And I've found this, that when I'm talking to kids of that age, because those are really, grade 6 is really the youngest group that comes in. If you're talking about 6 million, it's really hard for them to even grasp. But when they think of their pet, it really hits them, and it allows them to understand other things. But so I wanted to ask you, what were the ethical questions that you wanted to raise for these young readers? What did you want them to think about ethically?
So, ethical questions. I mean, I think this book is kind of packed with stuff. Yeah. So, I'm not even sure where to start, because it, you know, I sort of say usually I have one theme, but this book just kind of grew and grew and grew. But honestly, I would say that little passage that I wrote is almost the main thing that I want them to get out of it, which is, do not do unto others what you would not have done. And it's interesting, in Judaism, it's the not it's do not do, because that's supposed to make us stop and think when someone says do not do, right? And it makes us stop and think. So just this idea of treating others as equals and with dignity and with respect. And unfortunately, right now, the world, is living through a period of kind of cruelty and sort of baseness or vulgarity, and we are missing that kind of dignity and respect that that we could all use more of. And so I'd say that that's kind of the core of it. But of course, as the book goes on, Mia has a lot of things that she has to face, right? And in order to survive, you have to make all kinds of terrible choices, and some choices that you would think would be unimaginable. And that also, I think, has to be part of our understanding of what happened and of the survivors and of the Holocaust, that there were terrible choices that had to be made, and there was a lot of luck that you could try and do all the right things and it still wouldn't work out, or you could just be a horrible person and it might work out for you because whatever. So maybe you would both like to mention what you think in terms of the book about the moral choices.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on that. I think that's an important part of this book that really stood out to me. And I think of the German philosopher Lawrence Langer talks about choiceless choices. And we talk about Primo Levi and the gray zone and how you try to rationalize your decision, but sometimes there's no rational time to make a decision. You just have to make one, and you have to be happy with the choice you made. And in some cases, you make the choice and you just have to live with it. And these are the decisions that are rampant through the Holocaust. And it's hard for people to understand the complexities of that. And that's something I really loved about your book, is it really helps students to conceptualize these really complex ideas in a very simplistic way that allows them to connect with it. And as the story develops, they follow I don't want to ruin anything, so I'm trying to be careful with what I say. But you're like, when you sent it to me when I was reading the PDF version, like I was just scrolling through, I couldn't stop scrolling, I had to find out. And it allows students to grasp that complexity of this idea of choiceless choices. And sometimes you're put in a situation where you just go with your gut instinct and you got to live with it. And so the ethical and moral implications that are brought up throughout the book, I think, are really important, especially at a grade 6 level. I mean, it's applicable to 9 to 12, if I'm being honest, because it's hard to grasp morality and ethics and these types of questions. And even one of my grade 12 German students, he asked the question just the other day, well, Mr. Hiebert, how do people start to hate? You're not born hating, so what turns them into people that hate? And I took your book out and I read them a passage of it. I'm very lucky to have an early edition. But it's true, you're taught to hate, you're indoctrinated to hate. And in Nazi Germany, especially in those early periods, showing weakness, it was an embarrassment, right? You had to be strong, you had to be hard. And I'm always trying to tell my students, but also my kids, like, it's okay to embrace your emotions, it's okay to be sad. And I think that you can really pull those parts of the book from whether it's Max or Mia, like you can really relate to both of them in that sense. And it's very relatable to kids and the struggles that they're going through in their life today. So I don't know if I just went on a rant there, but
It made me think of something. I was thinking that at one point, Mia she's on a tram, I think, and she's thinking, she's looking around, and people are talking about the weather, and they're talking about and she's like,
before Hitler came in, and this was just, she's thinking of this, just months ago, before Hitler came in. It was so fast. People were yelling at each other. They were screaming. They were having arguments. They were the communists. They were fighting with, everyone was fighting with everyone else, and they would get red in the face, and sometimes you'd see a punch thrown, and in a democracy, that's a good thing. And of course, we always say, if you're Jewish, you're wrestling with angels at all times, and you're allowed to fight with God, and you're allowed to argue and all of that kind of stuff. And what she knows when she's right is that no one can talk anymore. And of course, what happened is, and that sort of brings me to something else that I did want to mention. What happens is that even children would give up their parents, and so then you get into this.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
Yes, and then you get into this area of trust, and that's why democracy cannot survive without trust. It cannot. If you distrust everything, and that's why dictators feed us disinformation, propaganda, lies, because if everything's a lie and everything is disinformation and they had an amazing propaganda machine, as we all know, right? Then you can't trust anything or anyone. And then but you can trust one person. And that one person, of course, is the dictator. And that was Hitler. And they did love him. And Belle, I don't know, what do you think about that?
Sadly, we're seeing so many echoes of that today in society, of not being able to speak, not being able to, and just, shutting down the conversation. Absolutely. But also, it leads me to my next question. I mean, for kids, and for adults too, belonging is so important. And all of a sudden, she goes from, having all these friends and being a part of everything to really the opposite, not belonging anywhere.
Yes.
And her whole identity is questioned. And so, what were you hoping that young readers would take away from that?
We all know that how important it is to belong, and not just for kids, for all of us, right? It's not just a kid thing. Everyone's like, oh yeah, teenagers need to belong. Well, guess what? We all feel like that. But actually, this is a kind of perfect spot for me to read that other little section, if you don't mind. Okay. So, I'll just read it from here. Okay, this is just a short section, but I did want to sort of sneak it in and read it, because this is what happens to me in school, and this is what you're talking about in terms of belonging and how kids felt at that time if you were Jewish. So this is already in the middle of the class, but I just wanted to give a short reading, so I'll just start here. Each class is now transformed into lies. I call it the school of lies. Does Frau Koch actually believe this dribble? Who knows? Can everyone see me if I'm sitting down here? Do you need me to stand up? I just realized how short I am, so. Okay, who knows? She certainly believes she must make her students believe it. And then she makes Mia, because Mia is a good reader, but mostly because she's Jewish, read this every single day to the class. And this is what Mia is reading. Who reminds us most strongly of Jesus by his love of the people and his self-sacrifice, I read. My classmates call out, Herr Hitler. Then I must read, who killed Jesus, our Lord and Savior? The other students shout, the Jews killed Jesus. I must shout the answer as well, even though I know it is not true, deepening my humiliation, if that's even possible at this point. My cheeks burn. I hate this. I sit back down, relieved this part of the day is over. Frau Koch settles into her seat and announces, biology. Then she pounds her desk with her fist. Purity, she exclaims. Purity is all the goal of Der Führer. He has charged us teachers, we, who used to be unimportant, insignificant, with being the saviors of your souls. Today I will give you a perfect illustration. Marianne Kaufman, come up here. For a moment I don't move. This can't be good. Slowly I get up from my chair and walk to the front of the class from my usual spot at the very back. Now, students, Frau Koch says, as she picks up a paper from her desk. Here we have a live example for our biology lesson. Marianne had a mother who was both German and Christian. You can see that by looking at her. Marianne is the perfect example of Aryan beauty. Lovely round head, blue eyes, blonde hair. In fact, most of you here cannot attain such perfection. Wow, this is going better than I thought it would. But, Frau Koch continues, we cannot see what lies beneath the surface. We cannot see what's running through her insides like a river of filth. Someone in the room gasps. Rolf, who's become the class bully, lets out a whoop. The word filth reverberates in my head like a ball bouncing against my brain. It is scientifically impossible to make yourself disappear. I know that. I could flee, but where? Instead, I stand frozen to the spot, feeling a lot like I'm going to throw up my breakfast. Running through Marianne's veins is blood that's been polluted by Jewish genes. Blood that's now spoiled, blood that can no longer be part of the Reich, blood that we must all despise. In the future, there must be no more of this genetic mixing or blood mixing. We must be prepared for a time when mixed blood will be cleansed from our country so that we can be one pure Nordic hero. Soon we will not tolerate foreign races like Jews anymore. At Father's clinic, we sometimes saw dogs so sick they became crazed. Their eyes would glaze over and they would bark or even howl. They would snap and snarl. That's all I see when I stare at Frau Koch. A snarling, angry creature. There's nothing, of course, I can say or do. I still must adhere to all the rules of behavior for students, so I stand there politely. You see, she crows. She's got nothing to say in her defense. Rachel, take your fellow Jew to the bathroom. She looks like she might vomit, and we don't want her germs all over the classroom floor. So that's sort of where she's at in terms of the kid that was the teacher's pet, the best student in class, the A student, the kid that belonged, had a ton of friends. And she says at some point, she said, Father doesn't even notice that my friends don't come over anymore. Like, he didn't seem to realize that. But yeah, she's nowhere with no one. Do you have another question?
No, you had answered it already within your last response. I have a comment to what you read, if that's okay. I can yell loud enough, I think everybody can hear. But when Carol and I were presenting at NISTA this year, when she was reading the excerpts from the book, I just kept thinking of images and textbooks and books that were available to the German population at the time, and I think of the poisonous mushroom in particular, and the different lessons that are throughout that book, which you can still buy on Amazon, by the way. I use that a lot in lieu of your book to show how they would humiliate Jewish students and how they would really push the pseudoscience racial hierarchy that they were trying to promote throughout their educational content. Everything came back to genetics, everything came back to blood. And my students are starting, like when I teach with this, this doesn't make any sense. And like, good, it shouldn't make any sense. Like, you have a brain in your head. But when everybody's kind of drinking the proverbial Kool-Aid, and you have one of the best propaganda ministers that has ever lived, and they constantly drill this into your head, you don't think that this is a lie, you think this is truth. And a lot of these high-ranking Nazi officials too, I don't think they believed it was propaganda, they believed it was truth. And I think some of the teachers as well, when they're teaching their students like survival of the fittest, we have been chosen to be the Nordics, the Aryans.
Exactly, they feel special.
Exactly, right? And everyone wants to feel special. Everyone wants to feel that they belong. This is human nature. This is what we all desire. And I think the book does a phenomenal job of pointing that out very clearly, to have that conversation with students as a group. Or when you have new students coming from other countries. I have a lot of Ukrainians that have been fleeing from war, and a lot of them feel isolated. They don't speak the language very well. And you bring that up, it's like, how do you feel when nobody talks to you, or nobody says hello to you, or they isolate you from activities? How do you think they're going to feel, right? So it allows them to humanize the characters in the book, but it also allows them to understand like historical events in a really kind and compassionate way of how we should be treating one another.
And accessible to kids of that age in ways most other books just aren't. Absolutely. Well, I think we should open up for questions from the audience. If anyone has a question, I can bring a microphone over.
Carol, welcome to this discussion, and Kelly and the ministers from the government. This is a very, very important initiative that was a long time coming and finally it came. But my question is, it's fine and dandy to teach young minds the right way to think, but what happens when these young minds come home to perhaps their parents and relatives and friends who don't think the same way that they're being taught? How do they combat that, and how do they process that?
I can speak from an educator's perspective as well. So he keeps dying.
I know.
Yeah, this is dead. This is no good. We're just going to use one mic now. I get that question a lot, and even at the school that I'm at, it's diversifying quite rapidly. I've made connections with a lot of students that are of Arab background, and I get to know them on a personal level. I think the step one, what you need to do as an educator is get to know your students, build that trust with them, and then you can start having conversations about the cultural aspects of how they view other people. We can't control parents, that's not our job. It's bad practice to try to get the kids going home and challenging their parents. But it's trying to build an understanding where they can have a conversation with their parents and say, well, maybe this is not fully true with how we view other people. And it's a process. It takes a long time to build those relationships. I wish I had an easier formula for this, but unfortunately it doesn't exist. And having honest and trusting conversations where students can feel empowered, I would say, to have conversations with not just their parents, but their friends too, who they tend to kind of gravitate towards having the same views, I think belonging again. And I've seen a lot of good progress with some of my students in that area. And we've had some pretty deep conversations about things that most teachers won't even touch. But you got to build that foundation of respect, trust, and that they're not going to be judged if they don't agree with you. That's a democracy.
I was just going to say that's trust. That's what it all comes down to.
And I just wanted to add, this is nothing new. I mean, every generation has had this issue. I think maybe finally we have this curriculum to teach them about the dangers of how quickly hateful words turn into hateful actions and even murder. But you and I all grew up as well in situations where parents, there were a lot of parents who had been in Canada for generations and generations and had hateful ideas about not just Jews, but there was anti-Black racism when we were growing up, and anti-Asian racism, and before our generation as well. It's something that generation after generation has to deal with, but education is the only possible antidote or response that we have to it, and we have to keep on trying our best with kids.
And I would just add to that, as an educator, we need to be reflecting constantly on who we are, what do we value, I think every administrator should have a sit-down one-on-one with the educators in their building and say, what are your values? Why are you here? Why do you want to teach? Like, it's a very powerful position to be in as an educator, and I'm constantly thinking of how can I be better? How can I meet the needs of all my students, no matter where they're from? You know, I grew up in a Mennonite background. There was anti-Semitism in the Mennonite community, quite a bit, especially ones that gravitated towards the Lutheran philosophy. And but now it's having conversations with my aunts and uncles. We can do that, you know. But like you were saying, it's within every community. But I think the first thing is being able to have that trust and respect, and then having that conversation. I mean, that's how we can create a better world, one conversation at a time.
Any other questions?
Oh, that's dead.
Thank you, Carol. That was really wonderful and inspiring, and we all want to buy books. I bet there are not enough books out there for all of us to purchase. But my question has to do with how the book is going to be taught by educators. Is there a guide for the educators so that they know what kinds of themes to address, how to stimulate discussion in a non-judgmental kind of fashion in the classroom, and then how to teach children how to have those conversations at home?
Well, you've got the perfect person to answer that question.
This is Carol's show. This is.
No. But just to say, if there aren't enough books, there are bookstores that are carrying books. So I encourage you, in fact, if you all want to go out and buy a class set for, you know, everybody out there, you know, when you want, there, you know, yeah, you can go, there's bookstores all over Winnipeg with them, and so, yeah, just go in and buy them, which would be nice.
Yeah, just I've been talking with Carol about putting together or developing an educational guide for this book in particular. When I read it again, my ideas, like, it's probably my ADHD, but I just couldn't stop thinking of different lessons that I could use, different materials that could go with it, and they're in the resource guide. It works so well together with the book. So with the Jewish Heritage Center and other groups that are helping with professional development, this would just be an added part to it. So it fits in very nicely in that sense.
And also, yes, we will be doing professional development again in the spring, and now with the curriculum rolled out, I think we'll have more interest as well in teachers coming to that. But even last spring, when we were first talking about what the curriculum might look like, we had a wonderful presentation from the Azrieli Foundation, who has their survivor memoirs, which I should also mention, for grades 9 and 11, there are 2 survivor memoirs that are recommended in this curriculum. One is Susan Garfield's, and the other one is Stephen Carter's, both, of course, Manitobans, and Susan is fortunately still with us. But there was a wonderful presentation about how to teach stories from a trauma-informed perspective, and what kinds of things you should be addressing, and what kinds of things at a certain age, and what kinds of things you shouldn't. And I mean, when Carol said, you know, growing up early on, being traumatized by what she learned, we would never use the kind of practices today that were used 20, 30 years ago. We understand that. But this is a perfect book to create lesson plans, and I know Kelly will do a great job with that, and we're willing to help. And these are the kinds of things that we hope to present in the spring to teachers, so that they'll have an easier time teaching the curriculum.
I just wanted to add. So when Carol and I presented at Vista, like, normally those sessions are quite small, to be honest, usually 6 to 8 people. Ours had over 20 in both sessions. There were educators that were extremely hungry for training, for materials, for conversations, which gave me a lot of optimism. I wasn't sure what it was going to be like this year. And it was very, like, it inspired me. It motivated me to do more. And, you know, I think this is a really good sign for us moving forward with the resource guide and curriculum updates. Teachers want to do it, but they need guidance, and the curriculum and the resource guide breaks it down very simplistic for educators to understand how to approach it and what best practices are needed using a trauma-informed lens. And so that's something like I'm really proud of that we were able to do, like trying to take away any excuse for not using it. You know, that was really one of the first things that came to my mind, because I've talked with a lot of my colleagues, I've talked with other educators, and a lot of them just felt, well, I don't know enough about it, I don't want to do harm, so therefore I'm not going to teach it. And I said, okay, well, this kind of process can be used for teaching about residential schools, it can be used for teaching about other genocides at the higher level, grade 12, comparative genocide studies. It's very versatile, which is what I really love about it. And I think more people are going to want to use it because of that.
You're gonna hold it for me?
Well, that works.
Well, that's very kind of you, actually. I feel so well taken care of. Carol, thank you so much for the book and for this evening, and of course, thank you as well to Minister Schmidt. This is, I think, an historic evening. What I'd actually like to do is perhaps make a little more explicit what should have been explicit from Carol's readings of sections from, or selections from her book. And it's, I wish I had been the first person to say this, but I know I'm not. A good book for adolescents and children is simply a good book. So
I keep telling you. I just said that to Judith. No, Judy? Yes. I just said that anyway to one of the people here.
and yet there has been a tendency, certainly during the course of my life, for people to say, well, that makes a good kid's book. Well, it does, but the point is, it's a good book. So if any of you are hesitant to purchase a copy this evening because you think it's a kid's book, well, in the crass vernacular of my youth, get over yourself.
And yes, and for the educators out there, McNally will be offering a discount for teachers. Carol has very kindly donated the book she brought today, and the proceeds will go to the Jewish Heritage Center to further follow Holocaust.
Last burning question, this is your last opportunity.
One more. Getting my steps.
Haven't said anything.
Hey, Carol, Schuyler here. Okay, nice to talk to you in person. Congratulations on the book launch, the amazing book. Tonight has been a really inspiring evening for all of us. And something I'm a bit curious about is, what was sort of the either aha moment or the moment that you came up with the idea for this exact, I know it was a full circle book for you, but the moment that you came up with this exact idea for the book, or the first part of the book that came to you?
Well, I have a funny thing that I know I've got a book when I have the first line. But with this book, I must have rewritten that first line 40 times. So when you look at it, it's the most perfect first line I could have made it. But the aha moment was when I was researching Struggle for Hope, which is a much more, I mean, that is set in Auschwitz, right? That book is flashbacking it to Auschwitz, and it's a very difficult book. And also in Israel. And so I was researching that, and I just came across this. And it was just one of those things that you come across when you're researching, and I think it was actually, it was on the internet. And the strange thing was that actually when I came across it, I was like, yeah, I want to write about that, but then I could find very little about it. Like, there is almost no research done on the actual dog army. So I was able to get in touch with people at the museum in Berlin, the Jewish Museum in Berlin, and various other people, but it's not a heavily researched thing. So there's, I sort of had to go around that and do other things, like I was able to get research on police training and that kind of thing, right? But yeah, the process for me is I was like, yeah, that is, and I think I talked earlier about why it would work for me, but that was sort of that moment. But then until I had my first line, and I knew that it was going to start with a German girl of the Hitler Youth who tries to take Max away. And that was always the opening scene, because she was the same age as Mia. And Mia later thinks, a few years ago she was like me, like she was just a kid, right? But now in her Hitler Youth, uniform and the power that she has, she can walk up to me in the park and say, I'm going to take your dog. And that's how the book starts. I'm taking your dog. And Mia knows that she can take her dog. And that there's not one person in that park, not one adult, that is going to stand up for her and say, you can't take her dog. How do you get to the point in a society where you can do that, where you can do that kind of violent behavior, right? And nobody can stop you. And you're a kid even, who usually people don't let get away, let you get away with things. But a kid in that uniform could do anything. And that to me was, that had to be the beginning of that story, where it had so quickly gotten to the point of that complete and total power. And on the other side, in terms of Mia, the complete and total powerlessness, right? I mean, she had one choice at that moment, which was to run away. And then when she gets, to her grandparents, which is her safe place, then she's like, well, should I have stood up and fought her? And they're like, are you crazy? Of course you did the right thing by running. That was your only choice. You couldn't have fought her, you couldn't have won, and she would have taken Max. So that sort of, that I knew that kind of, in a way, encapsulated the whole book to come, was that first scene. And that first line was, that was a tough one. Maybe I rewrote it 50 times, I don't know. But anyway, it's there now and I can't rewrite it anymore. So I hope it's good enough.
Well, I want to invite you all to have a cup of coffee or tea and some treats back there. And those of you who still would like to pick up a copy of the book tonight, as long as we have the rest of them, invite you to do so. And maybe if you have some other questions that you want to ask Carol one-on-one. But I want to thank you all for coming. I want to once again thank Minister Schmidt, Mike, and Carla. You have been such amazing allies and friends to our community, and you saw the importance. At a time in these last 2 years where our community has experienced things that I'm sure none of us ever imagined we would, you've been there supporting us and by our side, and thank you.
And I'd just like to thank Belle and Kelly, and thank you all again.